Listen to Governor Connolly's testimony and notice how it precisely parallels his movements seen in this slow-motion clip from the Zapruder film. Governor Connolly is seated in front of President Kennedy on the right side of the limousine.
We had just made the turn and I heard this noise, which I immediately took to be a rifle shot. I instinctively turned to my right because the sound appeared to come from over my right shoulder, and I saw nothing unusual except just people in the crowd failing to see him. I was turning to look back over my left shoulder into the back seat, but I never got that far in my turn. And then I felt like someone had hit me in the back. So I merely doubled up and then turned to my right again, and I just sat there. And Mrs. Connolly pulled me over to her lap, and then, of course, the third shot sounded, and I heard the shot very clearly. I heard it hit him. I heard the shot hit something, and I assumed again it never entered my mind that it ever hit anybody but the president.
Next, we will correlate Mrs. Kennedy's testimony to her movements seen in the Zapruder film. She is very clear that she failed to recognize the sound of the first shot, but she heard Governor Connolly exclaim, "Oh, no, no, no," which she said caused her to turn from looking towards the crowds on her left to turn to look at her husband sitting on her right. In the Zapruder film, she is seen turning to her right towards her husband immediately after Connolly turns to his right. These independent, sequential movements of Governor Connolly and Mrs. Kennedy provide further interconnected corroboration for a first shot which must have occurred before Governor Connolly made that turn to his right at around Zapruder frame 160.
Mrs. Kennedy is easily recognized by the pink hat she is wearing, and can be seen in the following slow-motion clip, turning towards her husband immediately after Connolly turned to his right. The following relevant portions of her testimony, related to her turn, sequentially conforms to Connolly's turn, providing objective corroboration to show that a missed first shot had already occurred at some point prior to Connolly's turn.
You know, there is always noise in a motorcade, and there are always motorcycles beside us, a lot of them backfiring. So I was looking to the left. I guess there was a noise, but it didn't seem like any different noise really, because there is so much noise, motorcycles and things. But then suddenly Governor Connolly was yelling, "Oh, no, no, no." I was looking this way, to the left, so I turned to the right. The one that made me turn around was Governor Connolly yelling. But I heard Governor Connolly yelling, and that made me turn around.
A witness by the name of Phil Willis also described Mrs. Kennedy turning after the first shot. He was taking pictures of the motorcade as it passed his position at the corner of Elm and Houston Streets. During his testimony, he twice volunteered that he witnessed Mrs. Kennedy turn towards President Kennedy immediately after he heard the first shot. Mrs. Kennedy only turns once, and she remains facing the president until after he is hit in the head. Willis's testimony is further confirmation that Mrs. Kennedy turned after the first shot, and by extension, logically corroborates Governor Connolly's turn after the first shot. Mr. Willis was asked if he could tell whether President Kennedy had been hit by the first shot or the second shot or the third shot, or by how many shots he had been hit, and said in his testimony,
"No, sir. Except this one thing might be worthy of mention. When I took slide number 4, the president was smiling and waving and looking straight ahead, and Mrs. Kennedy was likewise smiling and facing more to my side of the street. When the first shot was fired, her head seemed to just snap in that direction. In slide number 4, he was looking pretty much straight ahead, and she was looking more to the left, which would be my side of the street. Then, when the first shot was fired, she turned to the right toward him."
Sam Holland is another witness who referred to Mrs. Kennedy at the time of the first shot, looking to the southern direction which would be to her left. He also referred to President Kennedy having his right arm raised, consistent with very beginning of the Zapruder film. Listen to the relevant portion of his testimony on the first shot.
"And she was looking in this direction, in the southern direction. And about that time, he went over like that and put his hand up, and she was still looking off, as well as I could tell. Pulled forward and hand just stood like that momentarily. His right hand, and that was the first report that I heard."
Bonnie Ray Williams, who was watching the parade from the 5th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, also mentioned in his testimony to noticing President Kennedy brushing his hair back at the time he heard the first shot. This is consistent with the very first few frames of the Zapruder film and may be what Sam Holland referred to with Kennedy's right arm going up.
The last thing I remember seeing him do was, it seemed to me he had a habit of pushing his hair back. The last thing I saw him do was, he pushed his hand up like this. I assumed he was brushing his hair back. And then the thing that happened then was a loud shot.
Rosemary Willis is the little girl seen in the Zapruder film, running along with the limousine. She turns her head and slows down, which she explained was because she heard a gunshot and turned to look towards the source. She saw a flock of pigeons fly off the roof of the book depository.
As they made the turn from Houston to Elm Street, they'd just gone a few feet when the first shot rang out. And upon hearing the sound, my normal body reaction was to look up and follow the sound that I heard. It was so abrupt. I didn't know what it was, but I was looking for what I heard. And the pigeons immediately ascended off that roof of the schoolbook depository building, and that's what caught my eye. My eyes were searching for what I heard, and I see the pigeons, they're scared to death, and take off in abrupt flight.
Rosemary has turned her head by frame 144. She slows and is completely stopped by frame 188 before turning to look towards the limousine that has passed by. Her turn in the Zapruder film suggests a shot may have occurred by frame 144. Since it is only 1.5 seconds between the first Zapruder frame, which is number 133, and frame 160, when Governor Connolly begins turning to his right, it seems possible the first shot may have even occurred before Mr. Zapruder started filming the limousine. Mary Woodward worked for the Dallas News, and stood on the side of Elm Street as the motorcade passed by. She wrote an article describing the assassination which was published that afternoon of November 22. She explained that she didn't see anyone appearing to be hit by the first shot she heard, but mentioned Mrs. Kennedy turning after the sound.
I don't believe anyone was hit with the first bullet. The president and Mrs. Kennedy turned and looked around as if they too didn't believe the noise was really coming from a gun. Then after a moment's pause, there was another shot, and I saw the president start slumping in the car.
I want to mention Amos Ewens and Secret Service agent Glenn Bennett. Although they are not corroborated by the Zapruder film, they both provide credible evidence that the first shot missed. Witness Amos Ewens placed the first shot near the black and white road sign near the corner of Elm and Houston Streets.
I watched the car on down the street, and about the time the car got back near the black and white sign, I heard a shot.
Secret Service agent Glenn Bennett was riding in the follow-up car. On the plane ride back to Washington after the assassination, he wrote down his recollections of the day, which he used to write his report the next day. He recalled hearing the first shot and then looking towards the president and witnessing a bullet strike the president in the back. Then he saw another bullet hit the president in the head. He wrote in his report,
I heard what sounded like a firecracker. I immediately looked from the crowd and looked towards the president, who was seated in the right rear seat of his limousine open convertible. At the moment I looked at the back of the president, I heard another firecracker noise and saw the shot hit the president about 4 inches down from the right shoulder. A second shot followed immediately and hit the right rear high of the president's head.